And the cover is so terrible, it's so ugly, I hate it. I mean, yeah, okay, that face over there is terrifying, but first of all, this is in the collection Folio Junior. This really hot guy, but he's a ghost. But she can't help but like him a lot. Bunch of teenage girls, have powers, need to fight evil, become best friends. Boom, voila. And welcome back to my channel. Today I have a very special video. I am in my childhood home at my parents'. There's a lot of books in this house. Most of them belong to my parents. I have with me all of the books that I used to read when I was a kid and a teenager, and I thought I would make a little video about the books that shaped me and my reading style and that have determined the kind of reading taste I have today. So the very first books that I want to pick up, and they're a pile of their own because there were 6 of them and they were hardback at the time. Not hardback, but like big format. So some of these books are translation from English to French, but some of them are just French books. And when I was young, there was one series that is a French series that I don't think it ever got translated into English that really shaped my taste in reading, and that I loved so much that I think to this day I will reread it, and I'm, you know, close to 30. So the first one in the series is this one, La Quête d'Ewilan by Pierre Bottero. So that literally means Ewilan's quest, so the name of the protagonist is Ewilan, and the first book is From One World to Another, D'un monde à l'autre. So this is the cover, it's quite cool. What I loved about these is that it was like a full-on drawing that went from the front cover to the back cover and inside as well. So this is like, trying to show you without making it fall, but this is like the full drawing, and each of them has one of those, so I thought it was really cool at the time. So that's the first book in the series. I have the second one, the third one, and then he made a second trilogy with the same characters. We find them again maybe a little bit later than that, like a year later or something. And so this is the first book in the second trilogy. Second book in the second trilogy. And then the last book, the third book in, it's quite a thicker one, the third book in the second trilogy. This tells the story of Camille. She's a young teenage girl, I think she's like 14, 15, something like that. And she's kind of super smart, like she's got a super high IQ, she's extremely smart, way too much for her teachers. And she just hangs out at school with her best friend, Salim. And she pretty much has no other friends or anything, and she comes from an adopted family where she doesn't really love her parents, and she doesn't understand why they ever adopted her in the first place, because they're those really stiff, stuck-up, extremely wealthy people who don't really seem to care for children whatsoever, so why did they adopt her in the first place? So that's her background. One day she almost gets crushed by a truck, I think, and when she freezes in place, and isn't able to jump out of the way. She accidentally uses powers she didn't know she had and goes into another world. So she goes into a parallel, completely different universe world thing and finds herself in this much more fantasy-based medieval type of world where she realizes that people have a sort of power over drawing things. And by drawing, that means they will draw things in their mind and those things will come to life. So she can draw a flame and it will become a real flame, like in her head, not on paper or anything. That's kind of the power, and so they're called the painters, I guess, in English. But it's a kind of power that most of people in the population do have it, but to certain degrees. So a lot of people will maybe have a tiny bit, so very little that they're better at becoming a knight or something like that, or a fighter or whatever. And then people, like she discovers herself, is one of those who have an extreme amount of power and are super strong in that department. They're not particularly skilled warriors or whatever, but they're really good at drawing, with capital D. So she goes on a sort of quest and she discovers that she's from that world originally, that her name is Ewilan, and that's what her real parents named her because her real parents are from that world, and that's how she managed to get into this world. But she doesn't have much control over her power, doesn't really know how to use them, and she understands in this world that having this amount of power is actually illegal because there's been a lock that has been put on the ways that people use the power, so it's almost like they go into a sort of like motorway for power in their mind or whatever. That's where they draw it from, and that's where they go into these different ways in order to use it. I don't really know how else to explain that, but people have put a lock in place to stop them from using too much of it, so that it's really reduced and they can't use that much. She doesn't seem to be affected by that lock, probably because she was living on planet Earth in our world, but she does discover that there are gigantic praying mantis type of monsters who are extremely smart and are basically the reason behind this lock, and the people who may have taken away or killed her parents. She's not sure yet at that moment, and she's trying to figure out what happened to her parents, where they are, why the lock is in place, how to take it out, etc. So there's lots of stuff happening in this overall quest. So it's a really fun book I used to absolutely love. I realize years later now that maybe it wasn't always extremely well written. There are some passages that feel a little bit clunky or cringy or whatever, but for a YA book at the time it was kind of revolutionary because we had a lot of books translated from English, but not that many super big famous books in French not translated that had like such a wide success at the time. Then you have number 2 in the series and number 3 in the series. So this is basically a kind of like big cast of character quest, a little bit like you would imagine The Hobbit and Lord of the Rings, but for young adults and aimed perhaps more at teenage girls and teenage boys at the time. And Pierre Berthelot, the author himself, did say, I think somewhere, that he was inspired originally by Lord of the Rings and things like that I think he read in his youth. These books are super close to my heart and really helped me becoming a reader. I think without these books I would not be the reader I am today. So that was the first pile, the books that I think the most strongly shaped me as a reader. The second pile I've got is my true childhood book. And my childhood books, favourites, I have this tiny little flimsy paperback book. This is called Les Sorcières du Collège, which means the high school witches, because collège in French doesn't mean college in English. Collège is high school. And it was a little series. I think there were 3 books or 4, I think, in the series, and I just loved it so much because it's truly more for children. It's like for a younger audience. It's probably more of a middle grade book, what we call nowadays. Obviously at the time, and especially in the French market, you didn't really have that distinction, so it was just like youth and that's it. But yeah, it's about two girls who are best friends, and they became best friends when they discovered they each had some sort of a power that they couldn't explain where it came from, and realized no one else that they knew of had that power. Not even their parents know about it. One of them has visions of what's going to happen in the future, sometimes in the very near future, and the other one can move things with her mind and has basically telekinesis. And so in the very first book, it's more like a small mystery that they're trying to solve with the help of their power in school. And the next 3 books of the quadrilogy, I guess, it's more about them discovering how come they have these powers, where do these powers come from, and why do they have them. And yeah, I love this. I love this so much. It's such a small book. I'm totally gonna reread this while I'm here. I'm gonna reread the four of them. The next one I've got, which finally a book everyone will know, maybe, I don't know, but it is originally in English, is Animorphs. Was it called Animorphs as well? So this is the first one. The cover is so terrible. It's so ugly. I hate it. From what I remember, the first one was okay, but the next one I think I got number 2, number 3 or whatever in the series, and there were a couple that I was just like, they were a little bit older audience books than the age I was reading them at. I think there's like one kid who can transform into a bird, and there's the whole thing from what I remember of the series that when they transform for too long they can get stuck in that shape and in that version of themselves. And I believe there's one book where the kid transforms into a bird and stays stuck as a bird, and it freaked me out so much. Like, it terrified me as a kid, so I was definitely too young to read those for some reasons. Yeah, I remember this quite strongly. Apparently I'm still shocked by the fact that this poor kid got stuck into a bird, so it stayed with me for sure, and I don't remember rereading those. The next book I got is this one. It's called La Prophétie des Pierres, which is roughly translated by The Prophecy of the Stones, and it's basically about 3 girls in some strange world, because it's not happening like on Earth, it's like proper fantasy, and it's about 3 girls who all have the name of a stone. So I think one of them is called Jade, one of them is called Amber. This was an interesting read for me because I remember reading about it in the newspaper, and that's why I bought it originally, because it was written by a 13-year-old girl, and I was so impressed, and at the time my dream was to become a writer, and I was like, I want to do what she's doing. How is she doing that? Like, that's crazy. I need to improve my writing and just read this book and know what she did and try and do something like her. It was really cool and fun. I really enjoyed it, so I was 10 times more impressed after I read the book. I was like, yeah, damn, this 13-year-old girl wrote a great fantasy book. I just really remember always thinking that I was sad there wasn't any more books in it, that I just really felt like it should have been a trilogy or at least a duology, and that it just felt like there was so much more stories that could be told within this universe or with these people. I still enjoyed it, and I liked the fact that all of the girls kind of hate each other at first and are really from completely different worlds and really different personalities, but as they go on their quest, they feel more and more like they're becoming friends and like sisters, and their friendship is growing, and I think that's what I remember the most from this book. It was really fun, and I think it was a great book for young adults, especially on the younger side. The next book I have from my childhood memories is Artemis Fowl, which again is one that I think most people in English would know. This is something I remember, wow, loving at the time, loving these books so fucking much. I don't know what else to say about this. I feel like most people know what Artemis Fowl talks about. If not, do a bit of research. It was really fun, and it was such a good, again, more middle grade book than young adult, but at the time we didn't really have that distinction, and I think my taste at the time as a younger girl was all over the place because I didn't really know what category to read, and I also thought, I read a lot, so I was like, I want to read more adult books, so sometimes I would buy books that I think were a little bit too old for me, or more like too mature for me, and should have waited maybe a few years later to read them, but this was perfect for the age I was at the time, and it was just a really fun book and a really fun adventure. And yeah, I still remember these to this day. So the next book I've got from my childhood is Le Maléfice by Cliff McNish. So what is it called in English? Because I'm pretty sure it's an English book. The Doomspell trilogy is definitely the Doomspell. The covers in English are so much more like adult looking. They don't seem like this is really for teenagers. You can tell this is more middle grade. Yeah, I don't know. I mean, yeah, okay. That face over there is terrifying. But first of all, this is in the collection Folio Junior, which is a French collection of books for middle grade. And like, I don't know, it's got drawings and it's cute in a way. Well, that's not cute. But you know, like the style is nice. It's well drawn. But yeah, I really liked this when I was a kid. Again, there's like a theme to all the books that shaped my reading, and it's mostly fantasy or contemporary fantasy / paranormal, because it was a lot to do with magic, but also magic in our today's world where someone discovers that they're the chosen one or that they have powers even though they live in the normal world and no one else has powers. I loved witches, I loved all things like that, and I think it really shows in my taste now that I've kept that reading taste very much so still today. The next one and last one in this pile is Molly Moon, which again I believe is also in English originally. Look how shiny this is. That's so cool. Molly Moon was, I think, also a trilogy or a duology, I can't remember, by Georgia Bing, and I believe that she's an orphan living in an orphanage, and then she finds like a hypnosis book, which is the title of this. Honestly, it's not the one I remember the most from, but I do remember really enjoying it and finding that it was really fun and funny. And there weren't many books that I was reading at the time that were more like on the funny side, I guess. So I do remember it, but I don't remember everything about it. I don't think I reread it compared to some other books that I have at the time. Okay, so the last pile I've got, it's not as big as the other ones, is the books that I think shaped me the most while I was entering more the teenage years. So young adults, but still on the younger side, definitely more 15 to 17 maybe. For some reason, one of those was the Miniature series by Meg Cabot. I really liked those because I think they were one of my first taste of more Buffy type of main character, and I ended up enjoying those types of books a lot. The more adult ones as well that have a similar type of character I still love to this day, and the Miniature series I think was my first introduction to that type of character and I really loved it. This book tells the story of Susanna Simon, who can see ghosts, and she moves with her mom to California when her mom gets remarried, and when she arrives in her new school, the first thing she realizes is that there's definitely some ghosts there, including in her new house, which has a lot of history. There is one ghost who claims that he lives there and that it's his house. She believes that her job as a mediator is to help the ghost completely pass and go into the next world or whatever, but it's only when she starts in her new school and she gets a little bit more direction from the priest there, who happens to also be a mediator, and he recognizes her to be one as well, and he starts becoming more of her mentor. He's kind of Giles to her Buffy, basically, and that's when she realizes that maybe her methods haven't always been right and that she may need some help to help those ghosts pass. It doesn't help that there is one very angry teenage girl, queen bee type of ghost in school that is very angry that her ex-boyfriend, the one that she supposedly killed herself over, is starting to have a little bit of a flirty vibe with Susanna, and the ghost of the girl tries to go after Susanna, so she's gonna have to do something about it. That's the first book in the series, and then there's a lot more. Each book has other ghost stuff, different ghosts. Each one is like an episode of Buffy and she deals with a different one. But I think there's also an overarching like thematic and mystery about how to use her powers correctly, what they mean, etc. And the fact that the ghost that lives in her house is kind of like this really hot guy, but he's a ghost. But she can't help but like him a lot. That also, it becomes like an overarching theme in the series. But I really enjoy those. Like, I still like them today. The next book I have for this pile is this one, called in French Déesses de la Nuit, of a series Les Filles de la Lune by Lynn Ewing. So it's obviously translated from English. So the original title is Daughters of the Moon, for the series, and this first book in English is called Goddess of the Night. And this was very similar themes to all the other books I've shown so far, which is a bunch of teenage girls have powers, need to fight evil, become best friends, boom, voila. The next book I have, which has shaped my taste in a little bit of a different way, because a lot of those previous books had to do with people with powers and witches and that type of thing. This one is Interview with a Vampire by Anne Rice. Obviously it is in French, but it really introduced me to more of the bit lit type of books, and therefore the next book I have, and the last one for this video, is the first one in the True Blood series, aka Dead Until Dark, which is the first one in the Suki Stackhouse series by Charlene Harris, which inspired the TV show True Blood, and that I am actually going to reread in English very soon for another video. But yeah, that was the covers for the French version. I actually really liked the covers for the French version. All of them had some kind of similar theme to them. Let me show you another one. That's the second book. And then third and fourth. And I think when you put them together, they also had drips that worked nicely together. So like this, all of the drips on this side kind of like followed the same pattern and like matched. These, I think, were my true introduction to Bitlit. I don't actually read that much Bitlit anymore, and I didn't even that much at the time, because I think there weren't as many books that were as well written as these. A lot of them just felt more like a paler version of this to me. That's about it. I think that's all of my palettes. I have way more books in this bookshelf, but a lot of them just didn't impact me as much. I barely remember them, and I think these are really the ones that I remember the most, that impacted me the most, and that to this day I still really have the story in my head, and some of those I have reread many, many times. Yeah, I'm just talking to myself at this point, so I'm gonna stop filming. I will see you guys later. Probably the next video will be when I am back in the UK. See you guys later.